Hi, welcome back to another episode of Thinking Inside the Box on Noah's Ark. Today I'm going to show you 5 different ways to humanize virtual instruments. In other words, how to make them sound more like real recorded instruments. Because oftentimes I use virtual instruments to record some keyboards that I don't own or cannot afford, such as Rhodes or Wurlitzers or even organs. And I struggle so hard to make them feel like real performances. So I'm going to show you 5 different techniques I often use to make them sound more realistic and add kind of imperfection and human feel to the performances and those samples. So the first tip I'd like to give is to avoid quantization at all costs. Usually the groove of the song is probably coming from the drum track versus the actual click on which the drum was recorded on. And if you quantize to the grid, then the problem is you're going to lose that groove that has been locked in with the drum part. And that's going to make it too clinical and almost too perfect to be believable. So I suggest to not quantize, if possible, to keep that groove going. But make sure that you don't have any latency issues when you record MIDI, because that can really, jeopardize the whole song, the whole groove of the song. But that's not really a big problem because you can always shift the whole performance by a couple of samples. So my second tip is to record the virtual instruments as dry as possible, because a lot of times, those VIs come with presets that add tons of reverb, delay, and chorus effects. And oftentimes those effects are not the best quality because they come from the VI host. Imagine if you had reverb and delay on all those different VI tracks and having different kinds of reverb on each source. That's going to clutter up and muddy up the mix pretty quickly, and you're going to lose cohesion in the mix. So what I often do is that I remove those delays and reverb from those individual VIs and add 1 or 2 common reverbs to add cohesion to the mix, and that's going to make it more believable that the performance of those virtual instruments were made in the same space. My third tip is to apply tape saturation on those virtual instruments. So what I often like to use is a simple UAD oxide or a Studio tape emulation in order to add some of the analog mojo back into the signal. And it's going to make the virtual instrument less clinical, less perfect, add some imperfection that are inherent to the tape format, such as wow and flutter. And it can sometimes change the tone of a virtual instrument drastically by applying saturation on some of the keyboard VIs, let's say, for example. And that's going to kind of glue as well the performance using tape compression as well. The fourth technique is to use a low-pass filter. And you may wonder, why a low-pass filter? So when using orchestral instruments as VIs, those strings and those woodwinds will have a lot of information in the high end, and that can often give away the nature of those fake instruments. So by rolling off the top end, you're gonna suppress and prevent the brain from identifying those subtleties in articulation from those attack and release samples of your VI. And that's gonna make it more realistic to the ear. And it's gonna also hide those unpleasant samples by pushing the signal a little bit further back in the mix. And that's a good way to hide the fake nature of those virtual instruments. So finally, the fifth method is remaking or reamping. And this is by far my favorite technique to humanize virtual instruments. First of all, you can reamp. So if you have a nice room, a nice amp, a nice ambience, and a reamp box, you can actually send the virtual instrument signal back to an amp, then re-record that in a room. So that's gonna put some of the acoustics of the room, and you can also additionally distort the signal a little bit if you want. And that's gonna add irregularities to the signal that's gonna make it more believable. If you don't know how to reamp, please check my other video where I explain the whole process of reamping. Otherwise, you can also use a remaking plugin, such as the UAD Ocean Way Studio. And that's one of my favorite plugins to use because you can actually place any source in those legendary studios of Ocean Way in LA. And that's going to add some acoustic depth and dimension to those virtual instruments. And it's a good way to hide the fake quality of those VIs. So that's it. I hope you enjoy these techniques to humanize a virtual instrument in the DAW, or otherwise make those virtual instruments more realistic. And if you have other techniques that I haven't mentioned, please comment in the section below. And I would love you guys to like and subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this video. And I'll see you next time for another video. Thanks.